ontological.
That's how I do it.
360. That's so cool.
There it is, Mustache Scotty.
I'm not a fan. I'm not a fan.
You know what? You'll get used to it.
I guess I have to.
I've had it for over a year now, so.
So hello everybody. My name is Yiya, and welcome to Wild Swans Rising. Today's special guest is my dear friend and fellow creative genius. Fellow creative genius. No, that sounds really arrogant. Fellow creator. That's what I meant to say. Scott Kuri. This is why we have dry runs, because you don't end up saying things that you regret.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, it's inevitable, but.
Yeah. And who knows if Scott really wants to have Kramer hair on there, but that's up to him. No, not Kramer. Who's the other guy?
It might be, no, that would be Kramer.
Yeah. I think it's your thing. I think you like it. So Scott is a singer, multi-instrumentalist, songwriter, producer, and recent feature film score composer. He is just one of the funniest guy I've ever met, which makes recording much more relaxed, because I tend to just turn into a awful little like dehydrated raisin internally, because out of fear and anxiety and my inferiority complex. Someone like Scott just breaks you out of your little cage and pushes you to just focus on the work. And he's just someone that I deeply respect and has just brought me to the next level. So someone like you who's been writing, crafting songs and living into the questions, I'm just curious to know, what are some experiences you've had over the last year of 2020 internally that you feel comfortable sharing?
I think a big one for me has been what even is music, like within myself. And I think specifically because it was so much a part of my like work life.
Mm-hmm.
And then it was suddenly like kind of cut out from underneath me. And because it was the kind of like work part of it and the emotional, spiritual part of it were so intertwined, to have one kind of collapse left the other feeling very kind of exposed and a little empty, I think. So I for most of the year was kind of unable to make anything, because I felt like it wasn't actually providing me anything, and I've had to kind of refigure out how to make it just a kind of personal spiritual expression, personal, meditative expression, as opposed to it kind of being so related to, work and regular life. Because I mean, intermittent work, and it's kind of come back now a lot more, but overall I wasn't enjoying doing music at all, and so it was very difficult to find. I had to kind of let it go for a while in order to be okay with doing it again, and that was a real struggle for me because of how intertwined it was with my everyday life. And it kind of felt like I would never do it again at times, but it's yeah, it's been nice to come out of it, which is why I kind of switched gears and started doing other forms of art as kind of therapy that didn't have so much weight, right? Like I've taken up screen printing this year, and that's kind of brought me back to kind of the early stages of music, of like just enjoying it and not having any expectations, and being able to like learn and figure out something that's kind of inherently mysterious and not have to worry about it being such a part of my identity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, beautiful. It seems like your soul just found, a path towards a kind of redemptive use of the time, and it also knew what it needed to kind of feel nourished.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think so.
Like, what would you share as an advice to young producers who are working with new artists? Like for me, this was my first EP. I've never recorded anything that was like this intense, and it's only 4 songs, and I felt it was a huge journey and learning curve.
That one was definitely a learning curve for me too. Especially because you had so many, ideas, and like uh, at the time kind of unformed ideas about like what this could be, but you at the time didn't maybe have the language to articulate exactly what it was, so there was a lot of like back and forth and kind of figuring it out. And so, and I was kind of in a position of this weird mix of not always knowing, because the language within myself is so inherent. Having to listen and be interpretive to an artist is, I think, a difficulty a lot of producers have. And something I now feel some sense of pride in is my um, interpretive abilities, and understanding that. I remember the one specific song. I can't even remember what it's called. Weaved into my soul. Is that what it's called?
Ontological.
Yeah. Like what that song started as, with what you played for me on the acoustic guitar, versus what it turned into, are two absurdly different songs. Like it's insane how different they were.
This.
It was to this day, it's the most drastic change in a song that has taken place. And so like that one, was naturally frustrating because we had a few different styles that we had to get through first in order to finally get to the point. And so it was just this constant like tweaking of listening and being like, okay, what is she saying? What she has a vision, and we're not yet hitting it. And I can't, latch on too closely to my idea because this is her song. And so I have to understand that she has a vision, but there's also things I, as an artist producer, want to fight for and want to see in a song and want to help bring out of it. So, I mean, listening is kind of the biggest thing, is listening and hearing the actual root of what someone is trying to say to you is kind of the biggest task.
Yeah, and I really want to get back into that song, Transontological, a little bit later. But for me, I think part of the challenge of that song is that um, we're I was trying to build vocabulary and metaphors to describe the kind of a supernatural divine phenomenon.
Right.
Ontology is the study of how we experience, and trying to write this love song of how I experienced God interweaving his love into and through my life, and trying to use metaphors that are a bit more on the kind of mystical or puzzling type of metaphors, And so then how do you pair rhythm and ambiance and melody with this type of desire to evoke a mystical experience, but
Right.
also make it sound like it's a song that you still kind of enjoy listening to,
Yeah.
a pop song. um, so yeah, thank you so much, Scott. You know, as we're talking about this, like I really appreciate your patience in listening and trying to put together all of these different crumbs of thoughts and inklings I have to then shape it into an like audio type of experience.
Hmm.
It's nothing short of um, just deep. Um, yeah, I just really appreciate your craftsmanship in the work and not in listening to me, but also translating it into something that you felt was, you know, part of your signature of how you produce, and also part of how I was trying very hard to build a voice for the first time in my life.
Hmm. What were some ideas of the kind of through lines of your songs that are the kind of connective tissues between the songs as you were writing them?
I think, you know, I was definitely writing music as a way of healing and deep inner therapy. I'm using songs as a redemptive way of reframing traumatic memories.
Hmm.
And Red Eye Flight, which is very much about like the immigrant experience of always being on the move. And so it's like, it's trying to redeem my grief of never feeling like I'm landed. My family moved around
Hmm.
so much since they left China when I was 3, and I was in the care of my aunt and my uncle for 3 years without both of my parents. And then I was able to reunite with them. And, um, you know, from China to Canada, I was able to fly by myself because my parents couldn't afford a flight to come and pick me up, to then live in Halifax, Nova Scotia in a, you know, in a very, very tiny apartment and living a very, you know, frugal and humble immigrant life away from my family, my extended family. And so it's very much about uprooting the, you know, the deep emotions of that, um, and the sense of also being, you know, being rootless and kind of stuck, even though you're like, ooh, you're kind of moving around so much, but you're kind of stuck in this feeling of never landing.
Right.
um, and so I was trying to think about all of, you know, all of these moods I had about, you know, soul searching and healing, and waiting. Waiting was, you know, a major theme in the song. Waiting to land was in the lyrics over and over again. And, you know, the deeper question implicit in that is like, um, how do you hold on to hope while you're waiting for so long?
Hmm.
You know, and I remember wanting to my voice at the end to sound like just completely desperate, because that's exactly where my internal, you know, emotional landscape was, you know. Um, yeah. Do you remember anything about that song as you were helping me produce it?
Um, you know, I conceptually, I remember at the time that one I was so latched to the musical aspect of it that
Yes.
like the concept behind it. Like I remember, you know, this idea of like this this waiting and this kind of like constant building of waiting.
Yes.
Um, and I remember, but the main thing I remember is you kind of played that little plucky thing on the violin, and I was like, we need lots of that. And
Yeah.
I remember there was lots of little like trills and kind of counter melodies to that main kind of ascending violin pluck, which kind of added to the, the kind of building of chaos in waiting,
Yes. Yes.
when you're waiting, it's not just one moment after the other. They all kind of compile on top of each other and keep going.
Mm-hmm.
And so there was a lot of like, let's add more, violin, let's add another one, and have weird things that are kind of clashing with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the outcome of that song. For me, it was really about this living in limbo, again, connected to the waiting, but more so about observing like urban isolation
Mm-hmm.
and the common experience that we all have, whether you're in Dubai or Beijing or Tokyo or Vancouver, you can be so alone in a crowd. That sensation is so true to our times.
Yeah.
And I think you deal with that in some of your songs too. And what are some of the kind of thoughts that emerged with when you produce songs related to that?
Um, yeah, I often, in my music personally, my songs are often really, I don't want to say like busy, because I often try to not have a lot of like parts that are like super standoutish, but I
Mm-hmm.
like a lot of things happening in my music personally that like creates an environment of busyness. Uh, but there's always something very central that I try to focus in on. Um, and so it is definitely a common theme in my music where I want to like pair this feeling of like um, not always necessarily isolation, but there's a lot of specificity in the melody and what you're hearing, but it's in the midst of tons of other things. There's a lot of chaos happening, and there's a lot, and they are not necessarily interlocking and interweaving perfectly.
Yeah.
Um, and so that's yeah, that's often how I kind of look to achieve something within my music. And I remember in yours there was I think we had rain sounds. Did we use rain sounds?
Yeah, we did. Yeah. And it was,
Yeah.
I was pretty much painting a very literal scene with my lyrics.
Yeah.
The rain came down
Yeah,
like,
I remember that one. I remember there were lots of like specific things. You're like, I want this to be a part of the environment. And it was like very much like create a dark, stormy kind of mood and a feeling of lonesomeness amidst a city kind of thing.
and
I
it just,
also remember there being talk of a portal.
yes, that's right. Thank you for remembering that. That's more of the end of the
I
song.
remember it so well because you brought it up every single day. Like, don't forget the portal at the end. You have to go through a portal. I'm like, okay, we're going through a portal. Portal. It's partially just because the word portal is one of the funniest words in the English language.
Not to be confused with porta potties.
Yeah.
But it could be a portal.
They should make portal potties. It's a potty that is actually a trap door to another room. It just kind of like opens up and you go down a slide bum first and you fall onto a soft mat in the room below.
Okay.
Portal potty.
Awesome. So, okay, really quickly, I think, the portal really for me is about transcending that is using just the soundscape to bring people to a transcendent sensation, that they've left that urban dystopic environment into something that is vast and open,
Right.
because there's so many songs that play off. It's not just songs, but we've built a, well, Hollywood has built an engine of dystopic mindset, um, to now easily, bring, you know, the globalized culture, bring people of many generations into an easy way of thinking dystopically, because we've been primed, right? So I didn't want to
Right.
add to the priming of dystopic futurizing. So that's why I was annoyingly constantly asking you to make the portal porta potty.
Yeah. So you don't want to end on doom and gloom.
And it seems cliche now to, if you think about it, it's lazy to think dystopically because it's
Mhm.
so done.
Right.
But
It's
resilient hope is requires a whole new set of spiritual muscles.
mhm.
Um, Speaking of hope, then we moved into the song Honey. And for me, Honey was like a little break, a little reprieve from really kind of a dark, moody, internalized um, emotions.
Well, I do remember very specifically because we had the demo that you had, and then we changed it to like a new style with new chords and everything. And
Mhm.
then we kind of reached a point where that had been pretty fleshed out. And then we were in the studio, kind of not knowing what to do. And then I was just like, well, I'm going to do this piano thing. And then we did that, and it just kind of unfolded in that one day. And then came together very rapidly after that because it was kind of a bit of a switch. I was like, oh, I know how this can work. Like this makes sense now. Um, and I know what you mean, especially about like you had mentioned, using big words and not wanting to come across a certain way. And I think for me, that's a very common problem I have. Is I've always loved the lyricism of hip hop music, but I'm not gonna write a hip hop album, and it's very difficult. There's so much freedom in the lyricism of hip hop because it's so much about what you're saying, right? And you can say how it's you're writing that. But if as soon as you start writing like a pop song or like a melody, you've limited the amount of syllables and words you can use a lot. And so I'm often like in this place like, well, I don't want to use big words because people have to look them up. But it condenses complex ideas into shorter amounts of syllables. And so you can throw a word around like transontological, and boom, you've said something that you could have in 3 sentences, right?
Yeah.
And so it can actually be very, and it forces engagement as well in some respects, because it um if someone doesn't know where, they gotta look it up, or they have to like pay attention to what's being said around it. And but it is a definite balance of like, you don't want to come across as showy and like, oh, I'm just using big words because haha, big words.
Joni Mitchell, I think she's the one that says music is like liquid architecture or something like that. And it's,
Good old Joni.
yeah, good old Joni, who we love. Um, and it's for me, I really like resonate with what she says, not just because it's like true in building the structure of deep wisdom and thoughts that can house and shelter us, you know,
Mm-hmm.
um, but also it externalizes things that weigh so much, in, for me at least, from a therapeutic point of view. That which has been so weighty and stuck inside of me can now be externalized, and now
Right.
I can walk out of the through line of these songs, from Red Eye Flight to It's a Phase to Honey, and then on, Transontological. I can now see a map. I can now see the path that, you know, God has taken me in my, decades of life. And it brings to my mind and my heart a deeper integration, because that which you can see in a clearer way, it brings freedom.
Hmm.
And when you have distance
Yeah.
from it, instead of it being internalized, now it's externalized. And you could say, okay, that emotion was a part of my journey, but it's not me.
Yeah.
I am not the makeup of shame. I am not
Yeah.
um, just a heartbroken person walking around in my urban loneliness. I'm not, constantly asking, why the heck do I keep on missing you?
Yeah.
These things were experiences, and now they can sit and be structured in these little caves, in these little houses, in these little architectures that I can visit, but they no longer control me. They no longer weigh me down.
Oh, it's interesting because the way you talked about writing and releasing and like, making these songs and stepping out of them ties very cleanly into what we were saying with talking about with uh, acceptance and admittance of guilt. Um, you know, the stepping through it and allowing it to reframe, that whole narrative.
Yeah,
It's using these past things and stepping through it's like going through it,
yeah.
and
You're
and reframing it as something that can be used for good. And that is ideally the whole purpose of guilt, is a reframing of the situation. It's not just saying, oh, I am wrong. It's reframing that wrongness into rightness.
mm, beautiful. Yeah, really, really beautiful. I love how, yeah, how you kind of brought that to, yeah, to see the connective tissue of that. Yeah, so it's really powerful. Like, songwriting for me is such a, now looking back, was such a scary process. I was trying my best not to look like I was, you know, totally out of my mind.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but because maybe from my experience as a very emotionally driven person, like to expose the song to someone like a producer is like, you know, I'm not telling you my trauma, but it feels like that.
Right. Yeah.
So
Well, you're letting someone else in.
yeah, you're letting someone else in. And
It's important to trust yourself first and foremost, um, and not to defer. Don't give anyone authority that they think they have over your music. Um, the problem is a lot of people express opinions as though they know what they're talking about. And so it can be very easy when you're feeling self-conscious or fragile about your music or art to latch on to someone who's expressed a clear-cut opinion. Um, a lot of people like to live vicariously and like to feel a part of art by uh, giving opinions, but in doing so can sometimes undermine the what the artist is actually trying to do. So it's important to to think about your vision and what you want to do, and it's not stupid, it's not dumb. It just isn't. And if someone tells you it is, they're dumb and stupid. um, but I just see it a lot where people struggle with the confidence, and it's like they're amazing and they're great at what they do, um, but it can be hard when you try to please other people, and when you try to when you take too much consideration from outside voices. It's good to hear thoughts and good to hear people and how they interact with it, but you are the boss, so
Yeah.
you have the voice. And I think that's where, for me, I've definitely learned that I'm not always the I don't want to use I don't know how to say this. I'm not always the nicest producer. Um, in that there's some producers I know, people are like, oh, this scene was so friendly. I'm like, really? And it's I want to get along, obviously, but you know, it's good. It's good to have conviction, and it's good to fight for what you want,
Hmm.
and that will inherently come with tension. There has not been a session, an album or project where there hasn't at least been, not like fighting, but like there's tension.
Hmm.
I'm asked to listen and to perceive kind of alongside the artist. So there's and the producer starts to develop a vision, and the artist does, and there's a natural back and forth. Um, and it can be difficult to bring in a lot of voices in that. And so, you know, fight for the things that you want in your music and art.
That every single human soul has to kind of fight for that truth in their own journey, particularly in the Asian cultural context. It's even more of a powerful message, Scott, because it's very stereotypical. Most stereotypical things derive from truth. That Asian parents, are not very supportive of their kids wanting to become artists or musicians. Having that inner agency, that inner conviction that your own voice is worth working towards, your art matters, um, is so essential to hear. And because I didn't hear from my biological family, but I heard it through the ecosystem of my creative friendships and creative
Mhm.
mentorships, there was enough momentum built over decades of time that brought me to the moment where I said, you know what, it's worth investing in my art. Thank you so much, Scott, for just incredible sharing, your generosity, your hospitality, yeah, inviting us into your studio space. Thank you so much for journeying alongside me in how I'm discovering my voice, my story, my sound,